Russia annexed the Crimea. It's been in the news lately. Did you hear about that? This isn't the first time I've heard about Crimea. Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet laureate of Britain, wrote about the charge of the Light Brigade in Crimea back during the war in 1854 between Russia and Britain. And I ran across that poem as a student. But that wasn't the first time I heard about Crimea. I was actually there at the charge of the Light Brigade. You probably don't know this, but Lord Cardigan, who led that charge, almost didn't make the charge. His 6 men, yeah, history says 600, but he only had 6 men in truth, were all on weekend leave for about a month. Fortunately, a great hero, Mr. Peabody, gathered those 6 men back in time for Lord Tennyson to make that charge of the Light Brigade. Now, most war is folly, and this particular battle had no effect on that war, and winning that war didn't earn Britain a whole lot. In fact, they loaned a bunch of money to Crimea, and it should come as no surprise to anyone that they didn't pay the money back, because, as Mr. Peabody reports, Crimea doesn't pay. Now I'm here to tell you about my hero, Mr. Peabody. One of my first heroes, certainly my first intellectual hero. I don't know if everybody's familiar with Mr. Peabody, but I'll give you the backstory for those who aren't familiar, because even those who've seen Mr. Peabody and Mr. Peabody's improbable history probably don't know all of the backstory. First, let me show you a very short video so that those of you who might know a little about Mr. Peabody notice the chronology as he reverses back into time. Now, Mr. Peabody, of course, is the bespectacled beagle here. And as I said, he was a hero of mine. Our esteemed Toastmaster asked me, "Did you want to be Sherman?" I had never considered that. I always wanted to be Mr. Peabody. So what is Mr. Peabody's backstory? Mr. Peabody was world famous. He was one of the most intelligent and accomplished people of his time. He was a Nobel laureate twice over, a scientist, a businessman, wealthy, but he was unhappy. He was sad and lonely. One day, Mr. Peabody ran across some bullies beating up on a little boy named Sherman. And of course, being the heroic figure that he is, Mr. Peabody rescued Sherman. Then he found that Sherman was an orphan. And Mr. Peabody, in grand style, went to court all the way to the president until he was allowed to adopt Sherman. So Sherman was Peabody's boy, Sherman. And Mr. Peabody felt an obligation to raise Sherman. And Mr. Peabody lived in New York City. Now, New York City, there's not a lot of room for a boy to run. And Mr. Peabody wanted him to learn about history and other things. So, applying his incredible intellect, Mr. Peabody invented the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine was a time machine that would transport Mr. Peabody and Sherman back in history. The first attempt wasn't satisfying, though. They went back to ancient Rome, and they didn't understand what was going on. So, Mr. Peabody, always the problem solver, tweaked his Wayback Machine so that when they went back the next time to see Benjamin Franklin, that everybody spoke as if they spoke in English, and in colloquial English for the most part, although pretty bad English. This still wasn't satisfying because just observing history was not very enriching. So Mr. Peabody made another change to his Wayback Machine. He created, with his Wayback Machine, a improbable history. When the machine took him back in time, history was distorted. This allowed Mr. Peabody to apply his incredible intellect, his problem-solving skills, to change the improbable history and correct it so that the right historical outcome occurred. And of course, in the process, Sherman got to learn about history and problem solving and all these things. So one of the reasons I admire Mr. Peabody is that he can solve these great problems. But another reason I admire him is because he is a great orator, a great narrator, a great storyteller. Because Mr. Peabody, he narrated his stories. He was a character in the stories, in his improbable histories, but he was also a narrator. And through all the twists and turns, with his great command of facts and figures and other things, I learned about history from Mr. Peabody. More importantly, I gained an aspiration to solve problems from Mr. Peabody. And I learned about dozens and dozens of historical events that ranged from Napoleon to Leonardo da Vinci to, I can't think of all of them. There must be 90 or more episodes of Peabody's Improbable History. If you ever want to watch these, just search for the Rocky and Bullwinkle Show. And you will agree with me, I believe, that despite the cleverness of fractured fairy tales and the various antics of moose and squirrel, that Mr. Peabody's Improbable History, with his boy Sherman, is the crowning jewel of the Rocky and Bullwinkle Show. And of course, each of his tales ends with a pun, usually bad, but still demonstrating that my hero, Mr. Peabody, is the most clever person on the planet. So thank you for allowing me to share a little about my hero, because at age 4, I would lay on the wooden floor in front of that magical black and white TV and be transported back in history through the Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody, where I got to see those great people. Thank you.